Hello, everyone, and welcome to the iSpring Solutions webinar series, where every week we talk about e-learning trends, share iSpring tips and tricks, and cover clients' cases. My name is Paulina. I am the community manager at iSpring, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar, where we will be talking about how you can shorten your design cycle with effective co-creation sessions. And our presenter today will be wonderful Anne Rawlings, who is a solution architect at the Ken Blanchard Companies. Hi, Anne. Thank you very much for willing to do this wonderful presentation for all our webinar attendees. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to share something that some of my partners and I have been doing in our work that's really making a big difference when we're undertaking large learning and development projects.
Wonderful. So I cannot wait to get started. But before I pass the mic over to you, I would like to still go over a couple of technical moments.
Great.
So first of all, guys, I have great news for anybody who needs to go to a different session or a meeting. This webinar is being recorded, so no worries. You will receive a link to a replay sometime after this session. However, I would like to encourage you to stay till the very end because it's a wonderful opportunity to address your questions directly to our today's presenter. And yes, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. And in order to submit your questions, just paste them in the question box, which you will find on the right side of the GoToWebinar panel. Okay, perfect. I think at this moment we are ready to begin. So, Anne, I'm going to pass the mic over to you as well as the presenter rights.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, so the topic of today's session, and this is, I mentioned this is something that my partners and I have been implementing with our large design work, is using co-creation sessions with our clients. You know, when you have a stakeholder that says our budget has been slashed and we need to do something entirely different with a large body of learning, it can get real easy to go into solutioning mode very quickly. And then come back with something that you think is what they wanted, and maybe it didn't quite hit the mark. There's me. I just took a new position as a solutions architect with the Ken Blanchard Company, and coming to you today. So, the design of training and learning typically looks like this. We bring people into a room, there's a lot going on. We walk away with some fundamental information about what we think we need to build, right? And we might come back with something that hits the mark, or we might come back with something that needs some tweaking. And so we have started using these design sessions, typically focusing on content, because we've got tons of content in various stages of reusability, particularly for clients who are looking to digitize something that exists in a different type of a format. SMEs and everything needs to be included. They want everything in there. It doesn't include our learners, right? We're usually only talking to the client who talks about the end user, the learner, and what they want. And so a lot of assumptions are typically made. And then, of course, they're predefined. They might come to us and say, we need to have a half day of training build. And it becomes a real challenge. We become order takers in that case. And so there's never a surprise, right? We set ourselves up for scope creep problems, last minute changes, and then of course, our SMEs who believe everything needs to be included. We're putting 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag. And it's like, how do we get around that, right? Because typically we're setting ourselves up to fail. There's SME misalignment, our stakeholders might not understand new technologies, and we don't have a lot of great models about what good looks like. And so how can we shorten the time to design and still deliver that relevant, meaningful solution, and frankly, stop the madness? I'm sure that you've been in a position where you get a ton of content, you get some SME names, you get a timeline, you're told what to build, and you go and you build what the client asked for, or your stakeholder has asked for, and you come back and there are problems. So we started hosting co-creation design sessions, which are really designed to bring people together in the formative stages of undertaking a large learning project. And so what are they? These are cooperative, collaborative working sessions. They allow us to do some really agile analysis and put together a preliminary design that people agree on. Typically, they're multiple days. For instance, I was just at a large luxury automotive manufacturer in Munich about a month ago, and we did a 1.5-day session. They really needed to look at the ecosystem and how their learning is being broadcast and spread to their different audiences, right? We bring the right people together. So we had the learning partners in the room. We had IT in the room. We had some end users, some folks who are consuming their learning. We had people from different areas of the business able to weigh in, right? And the result was a full list of the inputs, what's going in, what do we need to be factoring, what do we need to be able to build to consider this project successful, and what are the next steps. And so really we go through almost a design thinking, a very agile, quick design thinking process with them, where we're working through understanding who the learner is. And we're defining what is the problem that we are solving for, as opposed to what training do we need to create, what problem are we solving and for whom. And then we do some quick ideation and we get folks to start brainstorming, because it's amazing to see how many incredible ideas these populations will come up with very quickly. And oftentimes they might think that it's not possible to do. And very often we find some of their big dreams, it's not too much of a stretch for us to be able to get them there. Of course, prototyping is building out, you know, a paper, almost like a paper tiger of what this solution could look like. And then of course, kind of testing it with the other members of the group, and then doing kind of choosing the best option to move forward. And so this model is basically the backdrop for our co-creation sessions. And so what's our intent? We want to get real about what we're creating and who we're creating it for. You know, bridging the gap between the goal and the project, how it's designed, built, and delivered. You know, we've got the right voices in the room who can make fundamental, critical decisions, who can take ownership of specific parts of the process. You know, we get what we need to create. We might leave with the lists of SMEs and topics and meetings scheduled. And we also leave with deliverables that are really the foundation of our project work. And so as we get toward the end of the session, you'll see we got kind of some tools. So I'll show you kind of what the outputs of these sessions are and how we use them, right? So what is the outcome of these types of sessions? A high-level learning journey, content roadmaps, right, that help to reimagine learning. And done in a different, more nimble way that is able to reach our modern learners in more effective ways. Typically, we might come up with a rapid prototype, maybe in a MOOC or a learning like an LXP or some other type of platform, and a scope of work for the next phase of development. And so we're able to have those conversations not only about the topic and the content and the learner, but how the learning will be served up, and help our stakeholders to get more creative, in some cases using tools they already have, but maybe they're not using them to their greatest effect, or using existing tools in new and different ways. So when should I suggest a co-creation session? So you want to be asking these kinds of questions of your stakeholder and your SME. What is it? What does new need to look like for the program? Why are we doing it and who are we solving for? Why are we doing this now? And what if we don't do this, right? What's changing that's causing the need for this? And if every stakeholder answers these questions differently, then a co-creation session might be right for your initiative. Again, it's bringing the right voices who have a claim to stake in this learning around the table and work through it together. That way we don't have the same burden of those last minute changes and things that are quite disruptive, particularly when you have tight timelines. So how do we know if we're going to be successful, right? A client whose expectations are aligned with you before the event, right? You need to know as much about the content and the clients as possible. So for instance, in that case that I was talking about, the luxury automotive retailer, it was having a deep understanding of how learning happens today, seeing a sample of their content, understanding what their technology stack looks like, understanding where learners have not felt that the learning that they've experienced was effective or helpful. And also understanding a lot about their learners And so we'll talk a little bit about personas here shortly. In my case, my client actually had done incredible learner persona work. So we were able to actually look across these different personas and be able to draw trend lines on what types of modalities. First of all, looking at budget, looking at different types of modalities and our learners and where they are in terms of a more traditional workspace with a laptop versus out in the field where they might need to have mobile devices that can access their learning. And so really pulling all of this together so that, we're really sorting through the details and getting consensus and identifying where we don't have consensus among our SMEs very, very early. Right? So our team needs to be prepared and ready. And so we have a number of different roles and responsibilities when we lead these sessions. We've got a primary facilitator and a backup, of course, because if someone gets sick or someone's flight doesn't make it in. So we always send two facilitators and a scribe, typically an observer who's kind of watching the room, able to share thoughts and reflections. This backup facilitator is someone who is knowledgeable also about the project and the client and other work that we've done for other groups that might be similar to them, to what the current ask is, to be able to provide different perspective. So contingency plans for quick changes. Some of these sessions that we run, we uncover some pretty significant conflict between, surprisingly, the IT department and the learning team. And so, you have to be able to flex and flow a little bit, because if you've got something that needs to be worked through that is going to be gating and prevent you from being able to move forward on a design plan, you need to be able to have that flex in your schedule and be willing to modify that agenda to be able to achieve the desired outcomes, of course. So it seems like a lot of work, right? They're intended to bridge the gap between scoping the need and building the solution, but we think of it as a way to build credibility and to mitigate risk. Again, if I can prevent some SME cacophony happening, 4 weeks from now by holding a design session up front, I really, really am able to have a lot more control over the project in general. Let's take a peek at the skill set of the facilitator. Truly, these are folks who've got really good group facilitation skills and are able to mitigate conflict. Certainly we create the provision for tension in the room, because that tension's going to be there whether we bring them in the room and we work through it together, or we don't and we use a more legacy approach, right? So our facilitators are agile and creative, flexible, highly consultative. And again, they have poured through the content. They've become very intimately familiar with what exists today as a starting point, or what are some options for a starting point if a lot of content doesn't already exist. So what does one look like? So I'm going to talk through what these experiences actually look like when we go into a client and we lead these design sessions. So typically, and this is kind of a high level, just a high level peek at what the planning and the different milestones are, right? The first thing is the kickoff meeting with the client, typically a couple weeks before, designed really to develop rapport, to start getting a feel for who the attendees are, kind of what their point of view is, because we need to know that going in. We draft the agenda for the event. That agenda is very clear and very specific about what we're going to be covering and when, and what we need people to bring in some cases to be ready to share their screen really quickly about a configuration in the LMS that is going to have an impact on what we're going to build. We assess their content, of course. Earlier is better. We create that session deck about a week out, and then we create the design document or toolkit. And this is basically, it's a roadmap that goes through topic by topic, how it's delivered today, what source already exists, who are my subject matter experts, what are the things that we know we're going to need to change in the content that exists today. Again, still what we're doing, agreeing upon the intent and the clarity, like at the very outset, so that everyone understands why we are coming together, They understand why they are in the room and what they need to be able to contribute. We're identifying who we're solving for by building learner personas and our target audience out of the gate. That's the very first thing we look at. Do we know who we're building for? If we do, let's see those personas and start looking at what this solution could look like. And if we don't, we need to work through and build those personas out. Right? We're going to determine the lens that we want to solve the problem for, because you're not going to necessarily be able to solve everything for everyone, because our different learners have different needs. But what we try to do is hit it on that bell curve to make sure that we are hitting the broadest swath of learning needs across the population. You know, we encourage them to think big, ideate without constraints. I call it dreamstorming. So it's, you know, if you could wave a magic wand, what would learning look like for a given persona who is part of our population, that's our target population, right? We're going to prioritize and gain alignment. We're going to take the ideas that everyone has built out, and we're going to rank them. And, you know, we're going to talk about what's possible within the given timeline. You know, what might be kind of a high risk, but a very high payoff investment that we might recommend that when, you know, one of our clients or stakeholders make, whether it's modifying that timeline, if there's flexibility there to do something different that is going to create a different outcome. And we get tactical, right? We're going to work through it all. Hands are dirty. We are in the content. We are talking SMEs. We are, you know, peeling apart traditional types of learning to pull out what are the micro nuggets from this 4-hour block of problem solving training. What could we create micro nuggets, and what could those little micro nuggets look like when laid out in a learning journey? So the deliverables, and we'll talk a little bit about this. So a refined learner persona, or a set of learner personas typically, right? Our measurement strategy, what are we looking to change? Not what behavior do we want to change, but what do we want that performance outcome to look like? Because if we're not changing behavior in a way that has a palpable business outcome, we've missed our mark, right? Our content, models, modalities to address the different goals. Another project that we led, a very large, high-profile design session, another luxury automobile manufacturer out of Stuttgart, Germany. And they were looking to find a way to cut down on travel globally for their instructor-led training. And they had 13 days, packed days of ILT. And we needed to help them to sort through, how do you pull this apart? And how do you serve up learning in different ways that are going to reach your learners, that are going to be meaningful, that follow this journey type of design that helps us to dramatically reduce the need for them to travel around the globe to come in for training, right? So that journey design is one of the outputs, our technology strategy. So, you know, could you possibly add a chatbot that rides alongside of this, that's going to make your new learning plan more effective? Do we want to, you know, if you've got Degreed, are you going to use Degreed's pathways or skill plans possibly as a different way to serve up some of these micro nuggets of content, right? You know, and we really get the big ideas, you know, depending on what the LMS is, depending on what other tools they've got, you know, helping them to sort out what is going to be their best approach. What can you do in the timeline with the budget you've got, you know, and as you begin to evolve what is being created and built, you know, what are some things that you could do to really elevate that experience and extend the shelf life, extend the reach, and reach your learners kind of where they are when they are. And we leave typically with a plan for development. You know, these are the things we're actually going to build. You know, whether it's a course or a series of quick micro nuggets that could be created using the iSpring solution, and some assessments, right, that are combined maybe with some job aids and nestled in to that journey experience. They leave with a list of what we're actually going to be building for them. Again, it goes to that creation of consensus, which is so important for us to be able to move forward and know that we're going to be moving forward, not moving back when we get to reviews. So typically prior to the design, we do these virtual envisioning sessions. You know, and really it's for the client to share their vision for the full end-to-end program, right? And it helps us to get a feel for how well they know their audience and their audience and learners, and what they're expecting us to be able to deliver. We're looking at that timeline for a pilot for deployment. We do a second envisioning session again before we're all in the room, and it allows us to get alignment on open questions, things that we haven't seen that we should see before we're all together. Particularly for those of you who are developing learning solutions for global audiences, these are huge, and there are an awful lot of considerations, and it's particularly meeting different audiences who might have different form factors, even if they're doing the same job, but in different parts of the world. And so typically that second envisioning session allows us to get real clear and make sure that we don't have lingering, outstanding, really important questions. And so for our learner persona development, and for those of you who've not done this kind of work, seeing it more and more, especially as we're talking about the digital and supporting clients with their digital transformations, taking, again, 13 days of loaded ILT and turning it into something different. That's an extraordinary expense. And so doing some work on the learner personas who you're actually developing for is so important, because it's a step that doesn't take a ton of time to build out, but it certainly provides guidance when you line them up along the wall and you're talking about creating a solution for a large audience. You can almost look across your personas to be able to identify, the widest swath of our personas will be able to easily access the learning, complete the learning. They'll be able to nestle it into their workflow. And so we take the time to build out the persona. And typically we do it in groups, and we do table teams, and we have them build out a persona for, maybe someone who is new in role, someone who is mid-career, let's say a sales organization for an automobile manufacturer. So someone who is new role, someone who works in the marketing area, but is part of the sales team, a sales manager, right? And what kinds of learning are they going to need from the big picture, right? And what is their general reaction? Are these folks who are technology or device savvy? Are they mobile? Are they at a traditional workspace and a desk? Do they work in an office with lots of people? What is their preferred way to learn? And so as we get these groups working through and building these personas, those become the backdrop for much of the conversation in the room. And so this is an example of a learning persona that we created for a manufacturing client. And so after the work is done in the room, this is the kind of picture that we're able to build. And so in this example, this is our associate manager, Adrian, right? He's working in the Philippines, 3 years in the role, kind of gives an idea of his technology savvy, the things that he tends to lean toward, what are his goals in his job, what kinds of learning methods land well with this learner. And so when we've got this distilled in quite this way, we are able to really do a good look across and make the right selections, make very targeted choices on what exactly we're going to be building. We also, once we've got our personas identified, we create a sample problem statement. And so typically, it's what is this learner struggling to do? So our example, a call center agent needs a way to use emotional intelligence with customers because rote tasks are automated and our calls are becoming more complex, ambiguous, and difficult, right? And so this is the problem that we're trying to solve for this call center agent. And as we start ideating and sorting out how are we going to address this problem, we're going to spread it across the 5 moments of learning need. And I'm thinking that probably a number of folks on this call are familiar with Bob Mosher and Conrad Gottfredson's 5 moments of learning need. There are certain things we need to have right away when we are learning something for the first time. And then when we want to learn more, that second moment of need where we're expanding what we're able to do, right? Versus applying. So now I've learned it. I've got a little more information. I need to be able to apply what I've learned. Or our 4th moment, solving a problem. And the 5th, when learning new ways to change or adapting deeply ingrained practices. And so looking across here and then reflecting it back on my call center agent, it really helps me to space out the learning on the journey so that we're not burying this call center agent with a lot of things that might be up in that problem solve or that apply when really those things needed to happen a little later in their learning journey. We also use ages to drive engagement, right? So getting their attention is critical, right? We've got to have targeted wins. Learning is a journey, and people need time and opportunities to make their own meaning from the learning. And so it's not about give them a couple of videos and they know it. It's giving them the content and having them reflect and think about, what does this mean to me in my role, in my job, in my workspace. We space that learning wherever we can. Again, across those 5 moments of learning need, we're able to give them those critical pieces early with some spaced reinforcement that comes later. I mentioned earlier, we use chatbot technology a lot of times to be able to reach folks on their mobile devices, when and where they are, easy. And it helps them to recall. It might have links to a course that they've completed or to some job aids that are there to support them now that they've finished their learning, or a certain set of learning nuggets. And the stronger that we feel the right emotions, the more we're going to learn. And so really being able to create these micro nuggets that have high engagement and high impact. So in the second day, we start getting into the details. And so here, we're literally starting to look at the content. And this is what I call the content roadmap. So, so in this case, we were working through needs and requirement analysis for salespeople and looking at how is it currently delivered? How can we reduce the classroom time? And how will we create a more experiential program for them? And we start literally taking these lines and brainstorming, what could that look like in a new state? And so the purpose of this, for those of you who are learning practitioners within your organization and you're building training for different clients inside the organization, or for those of you who are consultants, this skill is so important because a lot of organizations, they know that something needs to change. They know they need to be doing micro nuggets and digital, but they don't necessarily understand what is the process of taking what I have today and getting it into that smaller, more nimble format. And so this exercise and activity helps to step them through and build some confidence and build those muscles at looking at, a traditional ILT, facilitated discussion, and video role plays. What can we do differently, right? Short videos, introduction to questioning techniques, a participant workbook, some job aids, and helping them to see that these small, pert, high impact elements, when stitched together, are going to be able to certainly not replicate what happens in a classroom, but to emulate the hallmarks of the best things that are happening in the classroom as we move content into a more digital serve up. So lots of different really exciting things that we typically are throwing out on the board. I mentioned chatbots a couple of times, video coaching, AR and VR, curated content versus custom development. And then, of course, LXPs and MOOC platforms. All of these things are designed to be able to reach different audiences in different ways. And so having these conversations upfront and early, particularly because for some of them, they're more costly. For others, they have a relatively low cost. But, putting that out there gives folks, even if they don't have budget to do something like that today, to get them thinking about it, because our technology horizon as learning practitioners, our technology horizon grows every month. And particularly our clients, they're not versed in that. And it's our job to help them see what the future could be. And so we encourage them to think about these things, even if they're not quite ready for it today. So after the event, what happens next? So we finalize the design toolkit and the notes. So typically the deck that we created that ran the session with photos of their learner personas. Typically, if we've got those learner personas that were built in session, we'll build out the template like we saw of that refined template, the learner persona for our employee who's in Manila. But we build that out for them. So that's kind of one of the outputs that they can expect from that experience. Let's see. And we also follow up on proposals or follow-up meetings. So a lot of times we'll know what the high-level design is. We'll know who our subject matter experts are. We know where our content is, but we might not necessarily have all the links to the content, the locations. We don't have meetings scheduled. And then we follow up on those right away because we have everyone leaving the room quite closely aligned with what the build and the schedule will be. And so we want to just keep that momentum moving forward. In that, right, you want no fear of perfection because you'll never reach it. You know, every experience is going to be different. You know, in some of your groups, you might have conflict that needs to be resolved. You might have some tension, some things to work through. You know, but the point is bringing everyone together and moving forward on an aligned solution very early. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. We can open it up for questions from the group as you have them.
All right, so let's get down to the questions that we have in our question box. So first question that I wanted to ask to you, Anne, is from Bulent. According to your experiments as a content provider to companies, when I get their inquiries, the service I give them should be priced upon what?
You know, pricing looks different. So in my former role at GP Strategies, we're a custom content developer, and we have, you know, we kind of have rate cards because that's what we do. So we were not independent, you know, but we had a full media development arm. We had a full instructional design practice, content development practice, and engineering team as well for some of our more innovative kind of future forward AR, VR. But you know, for those of you who are in smaller organizations or are independent, the whole digitization strategy can be very, very unnerving because we're talking about different technology components. But the way I try to share that, and actually, Paulina, this might be something that might be of interest. I actually do a session on rethinking the content strategy, which helps practitioners to be able to take large blocks of legacy content and chunk it out into smaller micro nuggets, smaller nuggets. But you know, you don't have to be a media developer or have a video studio to be able to do some really great nuggetizing of, you know, our longer 60-minute courses, right? And you know, the tools that we use to build our product remain largely the same, but we're just thinking about that content in a different way. You know, for instance, with one of my clients, they were very concerned. They were like, we don't have a huge media budget, but we've got a lot of changes that need to happen quickly. And I said, you know, there is absolutely nothing wrong with taking an expert and having them film a 2-minute video on their iPhone or their webcam. You know, it doesn't need to be perfect because our shelf life isn't there. Things are moving faster than ever. Our content is outdated like quickly from the time that we release it. And so folks are okay with, you know, non-agency grade learning materials if it's what they need when they need it. And so for those of you who are smaller shops, independents, think, you know, quick, easy recorded PowerPoints, quick interactions built in our rapid development tools like iSpring Suite. You know, these interactions that can stand alone and don't need to be part of a larger program. And so a lot of those can be priced based on your time, right? Your time and any imagery that you might have to source or to buy. Hopefully that answered your question or gave you a little bit of a directional on that.
Thank you so much. And the next question from Balay. What can we do when we get resistance to our suggestions?
You know, that's a really good point. And in every one of these sessions, there is resistance. I talked about natural tension in the room. You know, and particularly for my role, kind of looking across the technology horizon, I always am able to see what could be. You know, and I talked about when I shared that list of kind of more future forward, innovative technology, you know, folks already have an idea of what their budget is. And so the natural tendency is to push back, and that's okay. We want them to see what's out there. And so if they need to do bare bones, simple recorded PowerPoints or an interactive PDF or a simple interaction and an assessment, or a series of interactions and assessments. I need to meet them where they are. But I also want to show them the promise of what could be, because I want them to know that we are positioned for it, we are thinking about it, because even if I don't have the money for kind of an innovative solution today, I want to make sure that the people building my solutions for today are ready for the case when I am ready to innovate. And so we always want to be able to show that, but meeting them where they are is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for covering that. And let's jump straight to the next one from Arthur. Do you have any suggestions on how to work co-creatively using asynchronous tools instead of synchronous meetings?
Absolutely, absolutely. So last week I held an 8-hour design session virtual with in the United States, one of the largest aircraft manufacturers. And the tools and the structure still stands, right? The inputs that you have coming in, knowing the people who are going to be in the room, and making the very best use of their time. So for instance, this was actually a leadership development program that GP Strategies will be building. But there are certain people who needed to be able to provide input on certain parts. They were invited to the whole thing, but we needed to make sure the schedule accounted for kind of those very, very targeted subject matter experts, because virtual sessions, of course, present more challenges because we are not face to face, right? I can't see if you're multitasking. And so the facilitation skill, it needs to be sharp, needs to be on. We need to have a tight agenda, and people need to know what their responsibility is when they are in the room with you. There's just no time for revisiting things because somebody was reading an email instead of listening to the questions that we have about a foundational piece of content that they're going to be responsible for. So yes, absolutely can do virtual sessions. Ours was 8 hours. We ended up wrapping it in 6 because we moved through it in a really, really tight fashion. And the agenda was really well laid out. So just kind of making sure that those other best practices are in place, and you can definitely be successful with a virtual session.
Awesome. And it's actually interesting how we are talking about distance learning, but still we need sometimes a co-creation session where everybody is together in one room talking about something in
Mm-hmm.
general.
Yeah, when I go back to the manufacturer, the automobile manufacturers, so 2 of them in Germany, and those engagements were about a year apart. They were both massive. But when
Mhm.
you were involving in a global company, when you were involving learning partners from every region in the world, everybody's got to be on the same page. And so specifically because of our geographic, you know, the the various diverse locations people were coming from, and understanding, especially in these global companies, learning, they might have the same learning architecture in place, but for instance, in Asia Pacific, people tend to want to use their mobile devices for learning because they don't necessarily have a desk where they can go to with a laptop, versus similar audience in the United States who might prefer to sit at their workstation and go through their learning. And so being able to hear the different voices allows you to really make targeted solutions. And so in both cases with the automobile manufacturers, those were cases where people were coming in from around the globe because either they were a hotspot of innovation and they were way ahead of everybody else, and
Mhm.
everyone should be learning from them and seeing them. But left up to their own devices, a lot of times, it's hard to organize that kind of thought leadership to bring everybody together. And so in those cases, it was really important to be together in a room.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing. And that actually leads us to the next question that I just received in an email from one of our clients who couldn't be present at this webinar session. So, Anne, in a nutshell, what is the biggest result that you got after implementing these co-creative sessions?
Mm. Could you repeat the question? It was the results, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Yep. So different results because the kind of the outcomes were designed to be differently. For one of our auto manufacturers, they were looking to reduce travel time, and we were able to reduce travel time by reduce in-class time by 68%. So when you average that across tens of thousands of sales consultants globally, that's massive. And so we knew going in that was the prevailing goal. But it wasn't just to cram everything into a digital format. That's one of the biggest follies that I caution my practitioner friends. You know, everything used to be ILT, and then there was this swing, and it was all click next to continue. And there are a lot of things that still require that very close human element. And so we were very candid that we don't want to consider this a full digitalization effort, because there are going to be things that people are going to need to be seen doing to be able to demonstrate performance. So for one auto manufacturer, it was reduction of seat time. And, you know, as we were going through, we were actually brainstorming and choosing modalities for their new content. And so we spent a lot of time on that. And you know, going from a 15-minute lecture and discussion to a 3-minute linear animation that is digital, we were actually keeping track minute by minute. You know, how many minutes are we reducing class time? How many minutes of digital are we going to be building? And then we were able to put the budget together. For the other auto manufacturer, they were looking for an overhaul in their learning ecosystem globally. Things are broken. And you know, they wanted to get the voices out on the table for how learning is happening well around the world. Again, areas of innovation and kind of a hotspot where, you know, they wanted to pilot a new ecosystem in one region and then firm it up and then be able to roll that out globally, you know, market by market. And so that one really was bringing IT and the learning practitioners together and getting everybody centered on the learner. Because in so many organizations, IT owns the budget for the LMS, and they're not connected enough to the learner to know that, you know, we've released all of this great functionality, and then they look at what the learner's asking for, and the one thing they've not turned on is mobile access, and that's the number one thing the learner wants. So getting everybody centered on that to be able to make really good technology decisions and investments. So that was another goal. And then for our audit for the aviation aircraft manufacturer last week, their goal was to tighten up and refine an existing program and build some new content there and kind of sort out what new for that program would look like. So the outcomes can be quite different depending on, you know, what the client is looking to do and to solve for. But the tools that I share with you, all of those had a place in every one of those engagements.
Thank you. Thank you very much for covering this question in so details.
Yeah, you
And
bet.
we received, yeah, a comment from Arthur. Thank you. My problem at work nowadays is that sometimes I work with people from the other part of the globe, just like you mentioned,
Yeah.
and it's quite difficult to gather people in different time zones together. So I've been trying to use Google Docs to do this design work. That's why he was asking about some asynchronous tools instead of
Yep.
synchronous meetings.
Yep. And you can definitely use Google Docs. You know, we also deal with that same challenge because we are working in global. You know, a lot of our companies might be regional, and we have, you know, a follow the sun model at GP. You know, where we have design shops around the world, and it is not uncommon to be on calls that include our employees and our peers and our partners in India, as well as in the UK, as well as in the US. And so we really try, you know, we bring that team together and we get that group to, you know, to really understand that everyone's participation here is important. And that might mean that we might need to flex and have meetings a little bit outside of a normal daily work cycle. And typically, from my perspective, I would be the very first one willing to, if it means I'm starting a design session at 11 p.m., that gives a little more comfort to my colleagues around the world. You know, sometimes that's just part of the job. And so when some of that uncomfortable flex needs to happen, it's in my best interest to get these folks
Mhm.
together and to make it easy for them. And so that's kind of how I approach that work, but it is a challenge. Google Docs is a great tool. We use Microsoft Teams as well. You could use SharePoint. You could record a virtual session, and then if there was a collective of people who weren't able to be on the session, you record it and you send them. These are the calls to action for every person who was or wasn't on the call. And you'll go to the Microsoft Teams site, and I'll need you to do X, Y, and Z. And so just being explicit and making sure everyone understands their role, people are far more willing to work outside of normal hours when they understand what the goal is and what the payoff is going to be for their participation.
Yeah, right. I completely agree with you on that. And at this point, it looks like we have covered all the questions from our audience. Thank you very
Awesome.
much, guys, for being so active. And thanks to you, Anne, for providing such valuable information. And I have received comments from other attendees that they are very much looking forward to review the recording once they receive it. So that's very good sign.
Oh, delightful, delightful. Well, guys, go out there and do great stuff. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter, find out who I'm following, because all of the luminaries in our field, I follow them. And ATD, e-learning guild, because that's where the community is hanging out. And so just thanks for being part of this today. And don't be a stranger. If you have a question for me, I answer questions. So I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. All right, so thank you everyone for tuning in today. Thanks to you, Anne, and bye everybody. See you at the next webinar.
Great, thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.